The film begins in the distant future after a global catastrophe nearly wiped out humanity on Earth. Earth's elites fled to a Kepler-209 space colony. However, 2 generations later, the Ulysses project was sent back to Earth with the mission to test whether Earth is suitable for human habitation and reproduction. Kepler-209 residents have modern technology and space travel, but have become infertile from heavy radiation there. The first mission was lost shortly after its descent, forcing humanity to send Ulysses 2, which also crash lands after penetrating the Earth's atmosphere and igniting fire. On this mission are a young astronaut named Blake with fellow astronauts Tucker and Holden. The space capsule lands roughly on a tidal flat near the Henderson Hub, a weather beacon that broadcasts telemetry data back to Kepler-209. When Blake comes to after barely making it to the surface, she discovers that Holden is killed. She goes to revive Tucker, who is still inside the capsule, and tells him that Earth's air is clean to breathe now, and there's no radiation either, making Earth inhabitable now. When Tucker asks about Holden, Blake tells him that she crossed over, which makes Tucker the commander. In 6 hours and 45 minutes, another tide will come on the beach, and they decide to use that time to gather data and prepare a report. However, when Tucker tries to move, he finds his leg damaged, and Blake goes on her own to do their first reconnaissance mission. While Blake explores the beach, Tucker tries to fix the capsule and communicates with Blake to remain updated on the mission. The computers somehow work. While walking, Blake notices bubbles in the water and confirms using a machine biogeochemical recycling in Earth's ocean, far exceeding their model's predictions. She discovers a chelicerata that is reproductive, and Tucker orders Blake to run the biometer on herself to determine if she's able to reproduce as well, since they've been away from Kepler-209's radiation for a long time. When Blake hesitates, Tucker orders her, and though the results are optimistic, she's still not fertile. He warns her that the weather patterns are changing sporadically, and he's discovering high humidity. However, Blake is occupied by more life forms, Aurelia aurita, a type of jellyfish that reproduces sexually and asexually. When she tries to assess it, the jellyfish stings her. Suddenly, the weather becomes worse, and Tucker orders her to return and report whatever they've discovered, but their next communication window is in 4 hours. She collects a sample and is about to walk back, but fog engulfs her, causing her to lose visibility. Tucker shoots a flare to guide her way. Once inside, Tucker notices a silhouette approaching, and thinking it's Blake, remarks that she returned correctly, but Blake replies that she's still 2 clicks away. Tucker suddenly hears rumbling and shifting noises as someone surrounds the shuttle. He arms himself with the flare gun. Blake tries to return, but it is too late, as Tucker is surrounded by a band of fertile humans nicknamed the Muds. When Blake returns, she discovers that the entire shuttle has been dragged away, and Tucker calls for help. She discovers the Muds dragging the shuttle in the cover of the fog and arms herself with a sniper rifle. However, before she can shoot, Blake is surrounded from behind by more Muds who capture her. She's thrown into a well, where she discovers a mortally wounded Tucker, and the two realize that humans have survived and thrived on Earth. When she sees Tucker's wound, she decides to climb out of the well to look for medication. She calls for help, but a child throws her back into the well. She shares this discovery of a child with Tucker, which signifies that humans on Earth can sexually reproduce. She uses her shirt to create a bandage for his wounds, but the lid of the well opens and a rope descends. Once she climbs out, a group of Mudsmen drag her towards one of their injured men, hoping that she will heal him. She asks for her medical equipment, but the people cannot understand her language. One woman, Narvik, understands her and asks where it is, and she replies it is in the pod. When Blake goes to the pod to retrieve it, her eye catches the communication equipment inside, but before she can do something, Narvik forcefully pulls her out. Now, with her medical equipment in hand, Blake tries to sedate the man, but Narvik forbids her from it, and Blake tells them to hold the man while she cleans his wound. When the man resists due to pain, Narvik knocks him unconscious with a kick, allowing Blake to clean it. Children and other Muds watch in awe. She returns to Tucker to inform him that she even discovered babies and has to communicate their discoveries to Kepler-209 somehow using their ship's biometer and locating Ulysses 1. However, because he's lost so much blood, Tucker consumes a cyanide pill, realizing that he will only slow her down. He tells her to find Ulysses 1 and her father, who led the mission. Blake remembers how her father left her for Ulysses 1 when she was a child after leaving a parting gift of matches and reminding her that they do it for the many. She whispers this motto as Tucker dies. Suddenly, water begins to flood the well, and Blake climbs out of the well and cries for help. A man lifts the well's lid, and Blake discovers that the tide has risen and the Muds are preparing boats to leave. The man leads her to a boat, where he binds her hands to a pole. At night, Blake sees a funeral, where the Muds tie a body to a raft and submit it to the ocean. She sees evidence of a thriving human culture, with babies, men and women naturally copulating in a clear sky. She recalls how her father used to tell her about planet Earth and the discovery of optimistic signals from the Henderson Hub, a weather station away from previous sites of human civilization. He promised to send her to it. The following morning, Blake is sent back into the well, and the children taunt her by showing her her red case, which they stole. A girl named Mayla shows interest in talking to her, and Blake asks her to retrieve the case from the children. Mayla throws another one of Blake's gadgets, and she insists on her red case, but Mayla cannot understand English. The two manage to perform rudimentary communication using gestures, speech, and sketches. Blake explains her origin from Kepler, and Mayla asks why she came to Earth. Blake explains how there are no babies on their planet, which depresses Mayla. The two share their names. Blake asks for her biometer, and Mayla goes to retrieve it. While she's inspecting bizarre sea creatures inside the well, suddenly, 3 women and a baby are sent into the well. She hears the sounds of gunshots and screams and climbs up to see a group of armed men shooting and abducting many of them. Mayla, who had retrieved Blake's red case, is also abducted. When a man walks over to the well to inspect it, Blake hides, and the women hide by going underwater. Once the baby comes out, it starts crying, and the women teach Blake how to calm a baby. Suddenly, Narvik throws a rope in the well to help them climb up and goes to look for Mayla. She goes up to discover that many of them are dead and missing. Narvik arms herself to look for them, and Blake follows her. On the way, Blake asks Narvil who the attackers are, but she doesn't answer. They take a brief stop to eat and drink, and Narvil explains that Mayla is her daughter whose father died in a flood. She offers Blake food and asks why she's following her. When Blake offers to help, Narvil thinks she just wants her stuff back. They suddenly hear Mayla's voice and pursue and discover that the abducted Muds are taken to a fishing boat. Narvil is about to use the flare gun to attack them, but Blake tells her that it won't do any damage. She suggests shooting it in the air to distract them while they free Mayla, but Narvil doesn't listen, forcing her to knock Narvil out and follow her plan. As men go out to investigate the flare, Blake swims towards the cargo ship and climbs it. She finds her red case in a fishing net and is about to retrieve it, but the boat suddenly stops and the men return. Blake spies the ship's captain wearing a jacket of Ulysses 1 mission. When the boat becomes crowded, she joins the prisoners and sits beside Mayla. When Blake shivers from cold, the man she cured earlier offers her his cape. The boat takes them to a massive cargo ship that rises above the frequent floods and storms, and the prisoners are forcefully escorted out. Blake spies the leader of the group watching from above the ship. Inside the cargo ship, Blake discovers that the captured Muds are being put to work as slaves to fix the ship. When Mayla is taken away, she calls out to Blake for help. The leader picks up Blake's weapon and, realizing it's not from Earth, questions the prisoners to whom it belongs, but none of them answers. He eventually sees Blake's dog tag containing a cyanide pill and realizes it's her. He escorts her into the ship's commanding deck, where she comes across a child, Neil, who asks Blake if she's an astronaut. Another man appears and confirms that she is, and he introduces himself to her as Gibson, a survivor from a previous Earth mission led by Blake's father, who was once thought to have no survivors as its capsule was destroyed, along with its communication equipment. Gibson is excited to see her and professes that he has waited for a long time. He is the leader of the aggressors, who are enslaving the Muds. Blake informs Gibson that her crew died and that she must communicate her findings from a biometer to Kepler 209 using a Ulysses 1 transmitter. Blake tells Gibson that it's on Gibson's ship. Gibson tells her that Ulysses 1 was destroyed by the Muds, including its transmitters. When Blake asks about her father, Gibson claims the Muds killed Blake's father for revolting against them and for attempting to invite humans from Kepler 209 to Earth. Neil calls Gibson his father, but Gibson explains that he adopted him and tells Blake that, because of the violent situation on Earth, they had to arm themselves. He asks about the situation on Kepler 209 and shows Blake a dam that he and Blake's father were trying to make and use turbines to generate hydroelectricity. He offers her a room with electricity and running water, and alone, she mourns the loss of her father and recalls more memories with him. The following morning, Blake discovers menstrual blood on her leg and realizes she is now fertile. She's given fresh clothes and goes out and meets the children of the Muds, whom Gibson is educating and preparing for the arrival of humans from Kepler. She sees Mela being dragged inside. The children query Blake about life on Kepler 209, but she feels uncanny about this. She notices Neil sitting alone, who claims he receives private lessons. He asks for her help in his maths homework and shows her a tree that he's attempting to grow, much like the tree Blake's father was growing on Kepler. He claims Christopher Columbus taught him about the tree, who lives in a cabin beside the engine room. She goes to investigate and learns that her father has been locked away. Gibson immediately appears and apologizes for lying. Blake asks why he's locked away. Gibson explains that it's because Blake's father sided with the Muds after falling in love with a Mud woman. Gibson believes that Kepler residents should never return to Earth and lead a rebellion alongside the Muds. She goes inside and meets him and asks why he betrayed Kepler. He explains that he does not want humanity to repeat the mistakes that devastated the Earth before, and he believes they should not return. Disappointed, Blake returns and tells Gibson that she wants to use the Henderson hub to transmit to Kepler 209 that she is fertile. Gibson promises to send his lieutenant, Paling, to locate the biometer. During a dinner together, Gibson introduces Blake to his partner. Gibson claims he saved her and her son from certain death when she delivered Neil and took them as his family. However, Blake notices that she appears very concerned and notices how Gibson forces Neil to follow Kepler 209 etiquettes of eating, not allowing him to eat otherwise. Suddenly, the power goes out, and Paling explains that while he was searching for the biometer, someone infiltrated the ship, took out their guards, and destroyed the generators. When Gibson goes to confront the situation, Blake offers to help, but Gibson orders her to lock herself in her room. Blake is surprised by Narvel, who asks her to take her to Mela at knife point. She complies and leads her to the children's dormitory, but guards appear to arrest Narvel. Blake tries to help her fight, but Paling appears. Despite Blake's resistance, he assaults Narvel and arrests her. Before she's arrested, Narvel tells Blake that they only take the girls. Gibson's partner nurses Blake's throat and comments that Blake has his eyes, indicating that she is, in fact, her father's partner. On the walls, Blake discovers pictures of an old Nazi breeding program and realizes that the girls are being held captive for Gibson's future breeding plans. She confronts Gibson and tells him that Narvel only wants her daughter, but Gibson insists that Narvel hates them. When she questions why they only abduct children, Gibson explains that most women back at Kepler will be too old by the time they reach Earth to conceive. When Blake tells Gibson that the human race does not need humans from Kepler to survive, he tells her that she sounds like her father. Paling discovers Blake's red case, but the biometer is missing. She thinks it must be back at the camp. Gibson sends her and Paling to retrieve it when the tide comes in and tells her that Narvel will be executed tomorrow. He asks if she's still with them, and Blake reluctantly agrees. She discovers Mela in a closet and promises to her that she will find Narvel. When Paling knocks on her door, she hides Mela and goes to answer the door, but Paling wants to search her room for Mela. Inside, he tries to force himself on Blake, but Mela sobs from the violence, alerting Paling, who goes to search for her. Blake distracts him by kissing him but feeds him her cyanide pill, killing Paling. Arming herself with her gun, Blake takes Mela to search for Narvel. She knocks out a guard and frees the prisoners, and the mother and daughter are finally reunited. Blake gives a gun to Narvel, who goes to free other children and families. After freeing the Muds, she goes to free her father, who notices Gibson moving toward the Henderson hub, which is odd since Gibson never leaves his ship. When Blake mentions the biometer, her father realizes Gibson's plan and tells Blake that Gibson's adoptive son Neil is her half-brother after her father impregnated Neil's mother. Gibson communicates information about Blake's father's fertility from the biometer, which proves the fertility of Kepler's. He pleads to Blake to stop him. Meanwhile, Narvel and the other Muds face resistance in their escape and fight the security. When a sniper blocks their way, Blake shoots him down. When the Muds escape the ship, the security people shoot at them from behind, and Blake shoots back while helping them escape. She carries the child to a boat but refuses to accompany him. Instead, she tries to stop news from Earth from being broadcast back to Kepler, but Gibson holds Neil hostage. When Neil's mother tries to stop him, Gibson shoots her and tells Blake to drop the gun. Forced by circumstances, she drops the gun, and Gibson sends the data. Blake strangles and drowns Gibson, almost drowning herself in the struggle. She's rescued by Narvel, who attempts to revive her while other Muds watch in anticipation. Blake coughs up water and is revived. Blake and her father rejoin the Muds and Neil and set out in a tugboat, Blake's father sends her to comfort Neil, her brother, who is mourning the loss of his mother. She gives him the matchbox her father gifted her, with the picture of the first 3 astronauts to step on the moon, and realizes that Neil was named after Neil Armstrong. Mud children hidden from the prior Kepler raiders fearfully watch an approach of figures through the fog, which turns out to be their kidnapped parents returning home safely, and the movie ends.